This is really good, but would you now please expound on that more generally with respect to Madhyamaka in the middle way?
I'd like to bring this back to His Holiness on that point, and also relate it to Anne. Because Anne brought to our attention early on that all of our experiences are saturated by concepts. But in our later conversation, you also commented that it's not just the equal level. Sometimes it's very conceptual, sometimes less so. So a gradient. And then relating this to David's point with the Madhyamaka, I would like to pose a question to Your Holiness. And that is, in the Madhyamaka view, it is said that every object that we identify, the computer screen, glass, anything, all exist independent upon conceptual designation. Right? So this would imply that our apprehension of every object must be related to conceptual designation. It's also true that in addition to conceptual designation, we may reify. And then on the dependence on that, then all mental afflictions arise. So could Your Holiness please explain to us what is meant by conceptualization or conceptual designation here in relevance very much to Anne's comment, and then we come back to David also, where is the middle way? It's a very large topic, short time, but I think very important.
So here, in one of the earlier sessions, His Holiness referred to the sutra on the Four Noble Truths, where he presented the teachings of the Four Noble Truths by means of first recounting the nature of the individual truths, and then the functions of the individual truths, and then the results of that knowledge. And so in the last category, with relation to results, although there is one way of interpreting that statement in terms of the knowledge of the cessation and also the unborn nature of phenomena, but there is also so the knowledge of the cessation of suffering, the knowledge of the absence of origination of the source of suffering. However, there is another way of interpreting this sutra where the understanding is that although suffering is to be recognized, but there is no suffering to be recognized. And although origin of suffering is to be eliminated, but there is no origin of suffering to be eliminated. And the point here is that when we talk about understanding the nature of suffering, if we, being not contented by our understanding of the meaning of suffering within the context of conventional level of description, and move beyond that and seek some kind of true reference to the term suffering and find some kind of essence, a real existence of suffering, then there is no suffering to be found. There is no suffering to be recognized. So what we find here is a kind of a paradoxical teaching where Buddha is on the one hand talking about there is something to be there is some kind of suffering to be recognized, but at the same time he's saying there is no suffering to be recognized. Similarly, an origin of suffering to be abandoned, or there is no origin of suffering to be abandoned. So what we find here is a kind of two sets of teachings, or two aspects of teachings, where one, there is a discussion about Four Noble Truths, the suffering, its origin, cessation, and path, each of which has a specific functions. Then another aspect of the teaching is that there are none of these four truths in reality. So what the Buddha is teaching here is that when we talk about these things at the level of everyday experience, at the level of conventional truth, at the level of how we experience and perceive the world, then there are these four truths: suffering, origin, cessation, and the path leading to it. But if we are looking at the ultimate reality of these things, looking for some kind of true essence, then from that standpoint, then none of these facts exist. There is no suffering, no origin, no cessation, nor path. So he's talking, he's discussing, he's speaking at these two levels. One at the level of everyday experience and perception, one at the level of ultimate reality. Sorry, and then so the second aspect really resonates what the Heart Sutra talks about. No form, no feelings, no
with respect to emptiness.
Perceptions and so on with respect to emptiness. So one might then raise the question, okay, so there's a level of description of this reality on the conventional everyday level, and then from the ultimate standpoint, none of these exists. So what? So then here, the question is raised, how, when we relate to the world and one's own existence, how do we do so in a naive kind of everyday level? We tend to relate to whether it is suffering or origin or path or cessation. We tend to relate to them, we tend to view them as if each of these possess some kind of intrinsic reality, some kind of reality defined by their own characteristics. So then it is this that serves as the basis for the arising of all sorts of afflictions. So for example, as one text points out, that first the thought I am arises, and then the thought these are mine or mine arises, and from this arises a whole... This is in Chandrakirti's text, entering the middle way, where he says the first thought I am arises, then the thought mine arises, and which then give rise to a whole host of afflicted mental states. So then the question is how... So Dharmakirti makes a similar point where he says that when you make the kind of the conceptual kind of when you have the thought that I exist, then on that basis you make a distinction between self and others, and from this kind of a dichotomy of self and others, then attachment to self and aversion to others arises. So Dharmakirti is making a similar point. So then we ask the question: how do we relate to this sense of self, sense of I am, this thought I am? So if in response to this we say that, well, the self or the I does not exist, then this is a rather silly response, because there is, you are there, you exist. And this negation of or acceptance of total non-existence of a person or I would be kind of contrary to our everyday experience. Then the question is, how does this I or how does this person exist? So it's not that the thought simply I am or I give rise to the afflictions. It's a particular way of grasping at this I, viewing this I. Similarly, simply making distinction between this thing and that thing is not going to give rise to afflictions, but it's by grasping onto this and attributing to these phenomena a form of existence which is somehow objectively real and independently existing in its own right. That is what leads to grasping and to a whole host of afflictions. So what one needs to find is a kind of a middle way or a balance between a kind of an understanding of the world where we do not undermine the veridicality or validity of everyday conventions which allow us to make distinctions between self and others and the world around us and so on the one hand, because this self and others and all of this distinction is very relevant to one's own existence and condition and sense of well-being as well. Yet at the same time, we do not slide into a form of understanding this world where there is a grasping that leads to a distorted mental states and afflictions. So in order to find that middle way, the Madhyamaka, the middle way tradition, speaks of how phenomena existing on the conventional relative level, but not in the ultimate absolute level.
So that would be also
다들 약속이다. 아들들이 준대되기 컨시 깨를 give 대마기. 달 깨를 신경이 쓰셔야 돼.
So the best in kind of
단여도 여체.
네.
땡은 좀 규진은 좀 셔. 규진은 좀 니기 때문에 라왕 그거 매버도 좀.
So
다
here,
단이 세우로.
so this
오마서다 dim으로. 오마.
So this middle way is really beautifully articulated in a verse in the Buddha Sutra, where he says that which comes into being due to conditions is unborn.
깨와 매라마다 깨와 정신이.
Sorry, that which comes
어제
into
무슨
being.
타임다. 전다들이.
So
깨와 정신이.
that which comes into being due to condition is unborn, because for it lacks, for it is devoid of intrinsically real arising. So what the Buddha is stating here is the fact that something comes into being as a result of other conditions is an indication that it does not have a form of arising. It is somehow definable by its own essence.
That's the middle way.
But Your Holiness, Buddhism also posits the possibility of non-conceptual awareness. So in your morning practice, when you're analytically investigating emptiness, it's a conceptual process.
Yes.
How is it possible to investigate emptiness conceptually, and that eventually leads to a completely non-conceptual realization of emptiness? How is that possible?
똑같이 조도면 줘야 돼. I have no experience.
But it is possible?
Possible, of course, possible.
Okay. I just wanted to hear it from your lips.
로 컴배치스요.
Because the mind follows after habituation, familiarity.
로 컴배치스부터 가려서 쉰일이. 로 kombechisu tenri ji bichero.
And then if we ask further question, how is it that the mind follows after habituation and familiarity? Then that's the way it is.
Thank you.
다 내들 들으셔. 춘이지르고 가서 자원집에르고 아니 뚜루그르고 된데나 가르치. 태베르고. 다 뒤르고.
So here it's helpful to take into account
아래 아상가가 송이래. 세버스야티.
Buddhist kind of idea of what I refer to as the four principles that are and which serves as an avenue for engaging with reality or analyzing reality. And this is explicitly developed and more systematically developed in the writing of Asanga, where he talks about the principle of nature, which is somewhat analogous to the laws of physics, but principle of nature, and then principle of function, and then principle of dependence. And taking these three principles as a basis, then you apply the principle of evidence. If A, then B, and so on. So these really serve, these four principles serves as an avenue through which you can investigate the reality. So many of the facts we find in the world are really what belongs to the category of principle of nature. That's the way it is. So why consciousness in the Buddhist understanding has this quality of luminosity? That's the way it is. Of course, then when we ask about its origin, what conditions and causes give rise to it, then we can discuss and explore.
Thank you, Your Holiness. Thank you.
Sean, you're the last one to ask your question.
Your Holiness, I was struck by what you said about secular ethics. And that would presuppose that we would have a set of universal values.
Yes.
So the question is there, what is the way of identifying those universal values? Do we already know them? Or is there a procedure that we would have to use in order to find out what those universal values are?
유니버스 수준에 다들 때문에 전주의 티 초과를 때 레다. 근데 잠바도 좋아서 전주 가보자 싶어. 강아지 저지요. 따와 저지요. 좀 되지.
So, yes, you're right that in order for this secular ethics project to really become viable, the values need to be universal. And His Holiness was saying that to some extent, these will be universal to also animals, not just human beings. But in relation to this, one of the curiosities that His Holiness has, and often asks partly as a kind of a jest, is, if scientists can figure out up to what point, given that animals have different sizes of brain, up to what point, animals may be capable of showing appreciation of others' affection. His Holiness is quite sure that mosquitoes have no sense of appreciation. As to the question of list, to some extent there is. One would expect, for example, like loving kindness, not just love, but loving kindness in the way in which we understand that is the aspiration for others to be happy. That and compassion, which focuses on others' suffering and sense of caring for that. And then also honesty. Even animals have an ability to appreciate honesty on the part of the owner. So there will be these very universal values which all of us will endorse and admire. And it's not to be, the list should not be developed on the basis of religious faith. But that's why the approach has to be purely non-religious and secular.
So the 예거를 또.
예.
사업 작업하면 또.
So these values are there. We don't need to actually seek them out. They are there.
따지 가지고 왔으나 따지 뭐인지야지.
So what is needed is to appreciate them and to recognize them.
그 개념이 뭐지다.
And then their value, their importance.
그다음에 뭐지? 장구적으로 쓰나? 셔버도 장구적으로 사서. 장부적으로 쓰면 셔버도 사서 지금.
Because many people, when the suggestion is made that someone should be compassionate, they immediately think that, this is only relevant for religious people or spiritual people. And if someone gives the advice that one should be honest and sincere, then again one tends to look at it as a religious value, only relevant in the context of a religious practitioner.
맞아 배다스 미상방양보 유주 사부도 저 남도 자도 땅 아이 디시고 중있을 정도.
Because sometimes there is a tendency on the part of, a lot of people that when we see someone who is kind of cunning and clever and kind of, deceitful succeed in
corrupted mind.
in a corrupt mind, then there's a tendency to admire and wanting to follow that example and be successful in those terms. So this kind of pattern seems to be implicit, kind of, indirectly teaching these values, these wrong values. So therefore, to counter this, we cannot simply leave the universal values without paying attention. So we need to make a conscious effort to...
I think everybody appreciate all these values, particularly at the time of young age. Then sometimes we take for granted, these are good. That's all. So my Indian friend, I often is telling them, India, concept of non-violence, through centuries, 1,000 years, there. And people from different religious traditions live together. And from childhood, they take for granted there are different multi-religions there. So that kind of sort of habit from childhood there. But then, usually you see, look, just
a normal thing.
A normal thing. So this is now, it is necessary to educate from
young age.
Young age. Now, in this country, in India, make clear this century-old treasure of India is something very relevant to today's world and can be example to rest of the world. So like that, these basics, or what is it, the universal value, everybody accept these are, I think, when our mind not disturbed, then at that time, I think, everybody, accept these values. Then we grown up, perhaps we may say, become more wiser, then all sort of 가서다
Manipulation.
가서다 tricks
Tricks lang.
Crafty.
how to manipulate, how to explore, right? Exploit.
Exploit.
All these things come, and sometimes in society, even I think appreciate someone very capable to cheat other people very smoothly. Then sometimes we admire, right?
Right.
Like that. And the hero, so-called hero, who have no hesitation to kill millions of people. Sometimes we feel, oh, great hero. Isn't it? That's I feel. So,
So it seems that imbuing, sort of, taking in that kind of value in the culture seems to be almost like manipulating our thoughts and our mind. So yesterday we saw in the clip that they also, young soldiers, some of them are talking about how pumped up they are. Some individuals, when they are able to inflict pain on someone that they dislike, the more pain they see in the other, it's sort of the greatest sense of satisfaction they derive from this. So that kind of quality is always would argue that is absent in a young child. So these kind of things, traits, only acquire once our mind has become polluted.
So, with this, I think it's the perfect closing remarks to what we have
polluted, just said,
Polluted, concluded.
conclude.
Conclusion of pollution.
Did I say pollution? No, concluding marks. Polluting marks. And we have had many messengers that have come from their particular field and have been reporting to you over the last 5 days. And I'm sure you have received much new input that you as the messenger will also be able to convey to the rest of the world. And we're all in this basically together, and I would really like to thank you from the depth of my heart for having shared your time with us, and also to have given us the opportunity to interact in this wonderful way. Thank you very much, Your Holiness.
So, perhaps in some of my responses to your questions, I may have spoken a bit too much than I should have, particularly from the Buddhist perspective. So if that has been the case, I would like to apologize.
I don't think that there is such a sense. And I would like to request Adam Engel, the CEO of Minor Life and also founding member of the Institute, to give a few closing remarks. Thank you.
Your Holiness, this has been a wonderful week, a really wonderful week, and it started in that down that path with your audience with the board on Sunday, where you invited us together to express and welcome us as more than friends, but as true comrades of 22 years. And it really emphasizes the deep and caring connection among us all. And from the very, very beginning, our intention was to establish the Mind and Life effort as a family. And I think that we're doing that. And this deep underlying caring connection is being evident in the work that we've been doing together, over these decades. As I mentioned to Your Holiness, one of our close comrades and friends, Barry Hershey, has not been able to be with us this week. His brother-in-law, sadly, is dying from brain cancer, and he has chosen to stay home He canceled his trip just at the very, very last minute. He didn't think it was appropriate for him, and he didn't want to be away from his family at this time. But thankfully, his daughter Betsy is with us. In the nature of family, John back here and Cliff have first came here in 1990, and Richie in 1992. And this year, they're here with their families. And as you know, my family has been here several times, and other families have been here. Many in this room have come back for decades, and others are very new. This is their first time, and we welcome them all in that spirit. Yesterday, Your Holiness said that more people on the planet today will listen to scientists in modern society than lamas. I think back to the year 2000 with our Mind and Life meeting on destructive emotions, when Your Holiness recognized that fact and said to the scientists in the room that it appeared to Your Holiness that Buddhism and other contemplative traditions have developed practices that really are beneficial for cultivating these basic human values. And you asked the scientists in the room to investigate these practices in their laboratories to determine, by their standards, whether they were in fact beneficial. And if so, to teach them in a purely secular environment to benefit humanity. And that has been the major thread of the Mind and Life Institute since that time. This is a huge project because in order for science to develop this kind of convincing certainty, it takes many, many studies over many years, expensive, that have to be corroborated. So it's a long-term project. It's nothing less than a multi-generational research effort. As an example, we all know that John, 30 years ago, developed the MBSR program, and there's been 30 years of investigation on that. And it's been a slow process for that to reach a level at which it is widely accepted. So as we thought more deeply about what was really necessary to create these fields, we realized that we needed two things. We need young scientists, more and more young scientists, to want to do this work and to make their careers in this work. And we need to link these young scientists to adequate governmental funding so that they can have the research going on for the decades that it's going to take. And so we developed a strategy to do this. And our strategy you know very, very well. The Mind and Life meetings with Your Holiness, some of which happen here, some of which happen overseas. This is our 18th in the 22 years. The Mind and Life publications, both books and electronic publications now. We now have 11 of those out. The Mind and Life Summer Research Institute. We're in our 6th year of that. We've had probably 1,000 students come through, 500 to 1,000 students. The Varela grants that we've established, we've had 50 of those now, and over $500,000. And now we have the Mind and Life Education Research Network, phase 1 and 2, to figure out how to bring the benefits of contemplative practice to children earlier in life and throughout life. And this strategy is really being successful. From just a few scientists in 2000 that were doing this work, there are now literally hundreds. And there are a few here today, young scientists, and I thought we could just take a minute or so to let them express to you directly. Over the years I've been telling you about how this strategy is working, about how these young scientists are getting. Now they're in the room, so I thought that rather than me tell you, we could have them just say a word or two. Amishi, would you?
Your Holiness, when we spoke earlier today, we were talking about the benefits that novice monks get from being in a community and the degree of wellness they experience from having a community. And I would say that in my effort to try to understand better the potential benefits of contemplative practices, the kinds of structure that these dialogues with Your Holiness has provided and Mind and Life's effort combined with that have provided me with that community. So I'm a member of the Mind and Life Education Research Network. I've gone to 3 of the summer institutes, and because of that, it's literally changed the way that I'm able to do my job as a professor. I teach a class at the University of Pennsylvania called the Cognitive Neuroscience of Meditation that's offered to undergraduates there. I have received several grants that the focus of which is to understand better the mechanisms by which mindfulness training has benefits. And I would say, but the most profound thing for me has been sort of my day-to-day inquiry into my topic area has been impacted by the kind of exchange that we've been able to have that integrates, doesn't keep the boxes that kind of Western cognitive neuroscience has taught me in my own training, but has allowed me to think about the integration and a different set of potential framework that I can compare to my own training to think in terms of what really might be happening. So I just wanted to thank you personally for your interest in having this exchange with us that has directly impacted what I do every day.
And Your Holiness, there are literally hundreds of stories like this, and I just wanted you to hear a couple of them firsthand. In addition to these new young scientists, the number of studies that are being funded are increasing dramatically. The Science for Monks project is moving forward, and we're working to find ways to collaborate more fully with them. The sessions that happen after this at 3:30 have been, some people say they're the best part of what's going on. And we've got those recorded if Your Holiness ever wants to look at those. The Center for Compassion and Altruism Education at Stanford, which Your Holiness has helped generate, is a marvelous step forward, as well as the Center for the Study of the Healthy Mind at the University of Wisconsin. The fact that we are going to launch in Europe next year, and we have our Indian friends here today and tomorrow to help us devise an Indian strategy. So all put in context, it is to develop, this multi-decade investigation by science into, in collaboration with the contemplative practice. And with these successes, there are risks. There are really challenges that we now face that we never faced before. One of them is a challenge of success. Now, it's no longer necessary just to be with Mind and Life in order to do this work. There's a center at Stanford. There's a center in Wisconsin. What does that mean for Mind and Life? Another challenge of success is the fact that more and more scientists are getting involved, but we haven't developed the contemplative side as fully. And we have to figure out a way to do that so that it can be a true collaboration between science and the contemplative world. There are gender challenges. The fact that the monastic community is largely male-dominated and the science world is largely male-dominated. And we're working all the time to try and figure out how to shift that gender balance. Financial challenges. We live in an environment now, we've just had a financial collapse. Will Mind and Life be able to raise the funds going forward? And also transitional challenges. Over the next 10 years, the leadership of Mind and Life, the founding leadership, is going to have to transition to the next generation of leadership. And we have to do that patiently, wisely, and consciously. Your Holiness said yesterday again that our hope for the future is children. And knowing that, we started 3 years ago the Mind and Life Education Research Network, MLearn we call it. We've just finished phase 1, which is a 3-year phase. We're ready to embark on phase 2, which is another 3-year phase. And the launching pad for this will be this meeting that is coming up in October. Educating World Citizens for the 21st Century. Educators, scientists, and contemplatives dialogue on cultivating a healthy mind, brain, and heart. This is a public meeting in October of this year. We have a world-class set of panelists, the same as we've had at MIT and at DC the last time. It's co-sponsored by the graduate schools of education of Harvard and Stanford and Wisconsin and Penn and Virginia. We hope that this meeting will be a catalytic meeting to spur research into this new field of contemplative education. In 2010, we're going to be in Europe with a meeting on altruism and compassion in economic systems. And we're going to be planning for a meeting in Delhi in next year as well. And at this time, Your Holiness, I'd like to ask you whether you would consent to do a public meeting in the future in 2012 in New York City. We think we'll be ready at that point in time to make another large statement. Is that a yes? Thank you. So that's a brief, putting in context what we've been doing for the last 22 years and what we plan to do for the next 22 and beyond. And so now we reach the time when it's going to be time to go. And I want to just express the fact that none of this, Your Holiness, would be possible without you. And we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for this 22 years of comradeship and participation, and for the decades going forward. Yeah.
I think as a part of formality, the although I already mentioned, the repetition is not necessary. In any way, I think besides, the profession, with the name of doctor or the professors, like that, on a human level, all, I think, sharing the deeper human value. And also, I think, genuine, warm feeling as a friend, as a comrade. These not necessarily come from professional level, right? This come from human level. I always see cherish these basic human level qualities, good quality, that I feel very important. And there is much greater possibility to increase these things. So, I appreciate. Then, of course, all the participants, I think when I saw the explanation with pictures, these things, naturally, I think you spent some time for preparation or homework. I appreciate. I appreciate that. Then, of course, translators, all these things, of course, very important. Yes, of course, our long-time friend, very much appreciate. Supposed to be successor, successor,
We have one bold man succeeding another bold man.
Then I think special thank is to our translator. I think every day, I think 4 hours, almost like prison.
So they're sitting inside a booth and translating for the Tibetans.
So I very much appreciate. Then I'm looking forward to our next meeting. That's all. Thank you.